reverberation go through your bones of that hard-hitting contact.
Nobody was in coats. There was no heaters. And I think those games were classic.
We had some of the craziest weather games that I can remember.
Those are the toughest conditions, 100%. The toughest conditions.
Welcome to another week of Coach. I'm Patricia. I'm joined by Michael Lombardi and Coach Bill Belichick. And it's weather week for us here, Coach. We're going to talk about different weather that affects the game. We've seen some of that already this season, but we're going to dive into the details. We're going to talk about some scheme, some of the most memorable weather games that we've been a part of. And certainly it's the middle of December. Winter is coming.
Winter's coming. There's a lot of preparation that's involved in these games, but also the actual execution in the game is affected by the weather. The teams are still the teams, and I think you can't ever forget that your team is playing the opponent. It's not playing the weather. You just have to deal with the weather.
Yeah, and certainly you've got to be mentally tough to handle the conditions, right? Because when everybody's talking about the weather, you're not talking about the opponent, right? So you got to focus your team and get them squared away to where the weather's just one obstacle that's in the way. The opponent's the main obstacle.
100%. The opponent is who you have to beat.
Well, let's kick this off. The team that really can get an advantage in the weather, they've got a great chance to win. Take a look.
As the snow falls and the wind swirls.
Weather is going to be key.
The wind and the rain really coming down.
I've never seen anything like that.
He's got running room. Steps over a man.
It looked like his arm was going forward.
Patriots retain the ball.
The kick is up. It hits the wind wall, and it is no good. I mean, not even close.
Weather was something we definitely talked about being in the Northeast, trying to prepare and give ourselves an edge. It can impact the players. It can impact play calling, schemes, things that we might run in the game. But one of the things people don't think about from the Northeast is heat. You know, we'd have to deal with the heat in the Northeast late in the year because maybe we were traveling down south.
Yeah, and I think for northern teams traveling to the south, Miami, Tampa, Jacksonville, those outdoor stadiums, it's definitely an issue and it's a concern. And preparation is part of it, but honestly, there's only so much you can do.
Right, and don't you feel like as the longer the season goes, in training camp we condition the team, but the longer the season goes, there's less conditioning. And so those Florida teams or Arizona teams in the heat, they're used to that heat. And then when you go south and have to deal with it, it really reflects upon your conditioning.
It does, but I think, as we all know, the human body adapts to change. The greater the differential, the colder or warmer it feels.
Right.
You know, and so when you get that change from 30 degrees to 70 degrees or 80 degrees, it feels like a lot more than it really is from going from 60 to 80. So how do you prepare for that? What I always try to do, there's really no way you can create heat in cold outdoors. You could go indoors and turn the heat up, which if you're playing indoors is an option. But the other way is to just put on a bunch of clothes. Put on a couple sweatshirts and start sweating right away and get used to what that heat and humidity is going to feel like by just throwing on a couple extra layers. That simulates increased body heat pretty quickly.
There was always a couple games late in the year where you would try to request maybe an opponent or put a preference in when the scheduling was going on, and it seemed Miami always got us late in the year. You know, we had to go down there, and we would always get our gear on, go practice outside. We had some days in December, it was -8, it was -2, so we actually went into the bubble. We turned the heat up in there, so now you got guys running, you know, to go across the field to get out to the bubble. We got 8 sweatshirts on. You get to the bubble, the heat's cranked up to 75. We're trying to take all that back off, but it was just really that mental part of the game of like, hey, let's just go prepare, make sure we know what we're doing. We're not playing the heat, as we would say. We're not playing the weather, but it did, I think, affect, you know, our guys mentally from that aspect. We'd really have to try to push through that, but then also physically, you would give us great tips and reminders, hydration being number one.
Yeah, and even though you try to heat the bubble up, our bubble, I don't think it went above 50 degrees in the winter anytime. It was always pretty cold. But yeah, hydration obviously is a big thing there. But the thing I also think that people sometimes forget about is the heat of a dome.
Right, yeah.
Particularly in the second half and fourth quarter when the overall temperature of the dome becomes greater as, you know, the people are in there and they, even though it's air conditioned and all that, just the people generate heat, humidity, and it can really wear you out. So we've experienced that in a couple of Super Bowls, but Atlanta in particular was one where in the second half of the game, you know, there's a fatigue element. Even in the Super Bowl, in Super Bowl 36 in New Orleans, we were hanging on for dear life at the end against the Rams. So that really is also an effect. It's not just the outdoor heat. It's the, I would say, culmination of 4 quarters of heat in a dome.
And it gives them such a great advantage because now you're dealing with the heat, which people don't realize that happens in a dome. In Minnesota, with all that glass on the outside of the stadium, that sun shines in there. Now, I know it's a cold sun, but it still heats up that building, and with all those fans. And then you add in that skull, that guy blowing on that horn all the time, right, which is annoying, and then all those people making all those noise. So now you got to focus and concentrate on the snap count. And meanwhile, you're fatigued from all the heat, and then it goes right into, now we need a bunch of IVs, which is typically something we do in the summer, but we don't do it in the winter, but you need them then. That's
another way to prepare, is to IV the players or just hydrate. They're really one and the same, but increase fluids into your body so that you can handle, and then keep replenishing them as you go through the game. But that's a big part of the heat. It's just the hydration and I would say acclimation to it.
And we would talk also about substitutions. That might be another thing that may be a little bit different than what we would do if we were not playing in that type of heat. We'd have a better substitution plan, or just, hey, remember, it's going to be hotter. These guys, pay attention to their sweat levels. We might have to have a different substitution pattern this week.
The worst thing in the world is to have your better players run out of gas at the end of the third quarter when you need them for that fourth quarter to win. So you're right, Matt. We'd manage those players' snaps. So instead of being out there for 45 snaps, maybe they're out there for 35, 30 snaps, so that you're going to get the 15, 20 snaps out of them that you need in critical situations in the fourth quarter.
I think we saw that on Thanksgiving Day when the Lions and the Bears weren't in that game for the longest time, and I think Detroit got tired. And in that fourth quarter, we saw Chicago, until they made the blunder at the end of the game, were really coming back, and they looked like a completely different offense. I think that happens in Super Bowl. Look, San Francisco's had 2 10-point leads in 2 Super Bowls against Kansas City and lost both games, partly because they got tired in the fourth quarter, and that defensive line couldn't rush to the same level that it rushed in the first quarter.
And I think that's where you see it the most. You see it on the defensive line and in the pass rush. And when they have to rush, when they get tired, then the rush just declines to almost nothing, and then you're throwing the ball at will. So I think that's the biggest part is the defensive line, the front 7. When they run out of gas, not saying other guys can't get tired too, but when they run out of gas, that really can just affect your whole defense.
We've got to be able to adjust from the heat when we're going from the north down south, but really it's December. Let's talk about the cold. Tell us some of the coldest games that you guys can remember that you've had to deal with, and then maybe some of the points that you've had to make to the players.
Well, I think one of the things that stood out about cold games that I first remember was Minnesota. They played outdoors, and Bud Grant never let his players wear gloves. And Bud Grant didn't wear gloves.
Or coat.
Yeah, or coat. Fran Tarkington and Chuck Foreman and the Purple People Eaters, and they didn't wear gloves. And the other teams did, but Minnesota didn't. And whether that did or didn't help them mentally, it was always one team had gloves, the other team didn't. But, as things moved along a little bit, they developed gloves. And when I was with the Giants, we wore these scuba gloves. They're kind of cumbersome now, and they look kind of, they're outdated. But that's what the players use to keep warm, and they have a little stickiness to them, so it helped the receivers on, if it was like wet snow or something like that. But keeping warm is a big part of playing in cold, and keeping your hands warm is a big part of it. Bud Grant didn't believe in it.
Yeah. And how about the snow? We talk about one of the classic games, the Ice Bowl in Green Bay. The footing was so bad. I mean, today, if Bart Starr would have got sacked 9 times, they might have fired Lombardi for that game because it was such a slick field and it was so cold. But I always talk about the great story Gil Brandt told about that day. He was with the Dallas Cowboys. Now, remember, this is before there's any gear given out to the teams, right? So you bought what you wore on the sideline. You were the Cowboys. So he gets a phone call. He's at the Holiday Inn, one of those Holiday Inns where you have to open the door to the outside, and the phone rings and it says, "Mr. Brandt, it's going to be -13 for the high today." So he's panicked because he only has loafers. So he runs out to the bus and he asks the bus driver, "Can you take me to the Army-Navy store?" And the bus driver says, "There's no Army-Navy store open today, Mr. Brandt. It's closed. It's Green Bay Sundays." And he said, "Well, I got to get some shoes." He said, "Well, I can't help you." He looks down at the bus driver's feet, and he's got 2 boots on. He says, "Can I buy your boots?" And the guy thinks about it. He said, "I'll give you $20 for your boots." The guy takes his shoes off and gives them to Gil, and Gil wore them on the sideline at that game. I always thought it was one of the great stories, but they had no gear then. I mean, they all, they had no gear. Nobody was in coats. There was no heaters. And I think those games were classic. And to me, every time I go to Lambeau Field, I go stand over where Bart Snarr stuck the ball in.
Oh, you don't have to worry about that anymore because the field's heated.
Oh, right.
But back when it wasn't,
Right. It was like playing on concrete.
It was, yeah. It's slick concrete, very slick concrete. We had a real cold game in the playoffs in 2004 against Tennessee in Foxborough Stadium. We put thermometers up around the field outside the locker room just to let everybody know how cold it was. It was a frigid day out there, and Bethel Johnson had a big, long touchdown pass where he kind of ran by the whole defense, and it came down to really the final play of the game where McNair threw a pass up, and it fell incomplete. We won by 3 points, but that was a cold one. And it's colder for the fans because they have to sit out there for the whole game.
Right.
For the team, it's not as bad because you come out for warm-ups and you go back in. You come out and play the first half, go back in. It's not too bad. But, I think when there's too many players around the heaters, or even worse, when there's too many doctors, trainers, and support people around the heaters so the players can't even get to the heaters, you have too many people on the sideline.
Yeah, that's
you knew the thermometers were working when you looked over across the field, and Tennessee's guys, they were looking at the thermometers, and now they're instantly going over the heaters. So the mental part of that game, that was playing into our favor for sure. One of the things about Green Bay that's amazing, the Ice Bowl, but that field in general, remember, it had the coils underneath it, so it would heat the field. But by the time the water, which had, obviously because of it being heated, got to the top of the surface, it iced up again. So that field was always kind of a mess. And along with, the Dallas Cowboy stories of the Ice Bowl, one of my favorites, and again, folklore, whatever it was they used to bring the video guy down in front of the team after that game because apparently it was so cold that he lost the first part of his index finger because he didn't want to take it off the camera as he was filming the game, and it froze. So, when there was any question of toughness in Dallas, you just had to look to the video coordinator. He toughed it out through that game, lost a finger in order to make sure we had that game on tape. That's, one of the great
the
stories.
amazing thing about that game is it was played on New Year's Eve, 1967. So it wasn't like now we're into January, and we're going to be playing the Super Bowl in the second week of February. So I know some of these stadiums are going to be covered. We talk about being in a dome, but now we're really getting into severe weather. I mean, Green Bay has severe weather starting in October potentially, but now we could get into really severe weather. If you got to go to Pittsburgh at the end of January, it's going to be cold. Or Baltimore, it's going to be really severe, and you're going to have to prepare your team for it. Buffalo, we saw them play the San Francisco a few weeks ago, and that there was lake effect snow in Buffalo in Orchard Park. There was no snow in downtown Buffalo.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest thing about the cold, really, number one, ball handling. That's a big one.
Right.
The ball just doesn't go as far in the kicking game. That's number two. So if you want to touch back certain returners in the regular season, no problem. When it's 0 degrees, the ball's just not flying as far. And then just the overall tackling situation. It's hard defensively when your hands are cold, when your body's cold, when you have that contact and you feel that reverberation go through your bones of that hard-hitting contact. Those are some of the difficult things to deal with, and it's hard to practice that contact. You don't really get used to it. But I would say the ball handling and sometimes the slickness of the balls that comes with that cold can be really challenging. So the quarterbacks that have big hands and guys like Josh Allen and all that are kind of built to play in that weather have a big advantage.
We would talk about the cold defensively from a standpoint of somebody's going to feel the cold at the end of the game.
Yes.
Everyone's going to be excited to start the game, so you're not going to feel it, right? But if we're out, we're tackling, we're aggressive, we're hitting them hard, we're winning, at the end of the game, they're going to feel the cold. Now, if the reverse was true and they were running the ball, we weren't tackling as well as we need to, then we felt the cold. So somebody's going to feel it at the end of the game for sure.
But catching punts, catching kickoffs, and catching the ball, period, is hard in the cold.
Yeah, it is. And, a lot of it's a mentality. We all remember the Steelers when they would come out there with Chuck Noll, and every one of those offensive linemen had no sleeves. They cut their jerseys off really high, nothing underneath them, so their full arms were exposed. And it was like they would all walk out there, we don't care about the cold. We're tougher than that. And they look across, and there's the opponent with long sleeves and all that.
Yeah.
So, but there is a little bit of a mentality to it, mental toughness, just like you talked about. But certainly something to deal with, and even though you're used to it, the ball handling, all that definitely helps, but it's still execution, being able to execute in cold weather and understanding field goal range is now shorter, Your punter's not going to be able to punt it as far, probably, or as high. Snapping becomes a little more difficult. For the quarterbacks, you got to put the ball on the receivers, not expect them to go up and make those circus catches, or the ball just go off their hands for interceptions and that kind of thing. So another dynamic.
Yeah, I love that you brought up the scuba gear, the gloves, and that is my favorite. You go out and you see everyone has no sleeves on, their arms are all exposed, but then you go in the locker room, they all got the scuba gear cut off at the shoulder. They got the scuba gear underneath it, so no one knows so no one knows they're not cold underneath. But we had the cold, but really the biggest element that we talk about every single year as you get to this time of December playoff football is the snow.
The snow's a lot of issues. Where do you want to start? So many guys have the shields on their face masks that when those fog up and the snow gets on them, they can't see, and trying to rub it off and all that. It's definitely a vision issue, but it's certainly a ball handling issue. And again, there's different types of snow. There's that hard, cold snow, and then there's that soft, very moist snow that makes things slick, the ball slick, your hands slick. Again, tackling is an issue. We saw that in the Buffalo San Francisco game. It's just so hard to tackle those guys once they got any kind of momentum going. But I think one of the most famous games in the snow was the Snow Bowl, right? The tuck rule, where Vinatieri kicks the field goal in 4 inches of snow, and then kicks the field goal going in the other direction, where we took a timeout so that the players could come out and kick the snow away from the area where Vinatieri was going to make the kick. Of course, before that, the easier way to do it was bring the snowplow out, but you can't do that anymore. So, but clearing the snow for the kicker and kicking in snow, obviously very, very challenging.
From the other side, I was on the Raiders but that Vinatieri kick, that one iron that he hit, it was truly a one iron.
Yes.
It was one of the greatest kicks I've ever seen in my life, because that thing really, how it got over the front of the line was remarkable. But through all that snow he had to deal with, it was really, to me, one of the most impressive things I've ever seen live. Going back to the speed of the game decreases with the snow on the ground. And so all those guys that are great pass rushers that join the swim team, they want to swim up the field and try to get to the passer, you can't do that in the snow.
Can't move from laterally very well at all. So snow is one of the best times to throw the ball because the pass rush really gets eliminated. You just have to have a quarterback who can throw the ball accurately and guys that have the toughness to catch it. But David Patton, Jermaine Wiggins, those guys caught a lot of balls in the snow and actually helped us win that snow game against the Raiders.
We would talk a lot about what type of snow is it? Is the field slick? Are we going to slide? Versus is it sticky? Do we actually have some footing? And we would adjust defensively how we could play those games. If the field was going to be slick, then we were probably going to play a little bit tighter coverage, kind of be up on them. I know the receivers have the advantage. They know where they're going. But, the defensive back, he's right on them. That guy's still got to make a difficult cut on the offensive side. We can cut with him. As opposed to if it was sticky snow, and really we talk about it all the time, Coach, hey, we can play some zone. We can read and break because we actually have our footing. And now the ball may travel a little slower. We're going to have an opportunity to go break it up, punch through the pocket. The ball's going to be slick, turnover opportunities. We'd really evaluate what kind of snow it was.
Yeah, it's certainly a lot easier to jam the receivers in that snow when there's 2 or 3 inches on the ground and they can't get away from you.
Yeah. One of the things about team building I think is really important is, we give out the Wonderlic test, and everybody thinks it's an intelligence test, right? And certainly it grades intelligence to a degree, but we also have other testing. But the one thing you really want to determine is, can the player have two things going on and concentrate on both, right? So we're dealing with snow, we're dealing with cold, and can they know the snap count? And can they know the play? And can they execute? And the higher degree of intelligence, it's been proven the players can concentrate better in those situations. And that's one of the things you're looking for in a player. If you're going to be in cold weather, you can't have a guy, not that he's from Florida and he's not used to it. You got to make sure, even if he's from Florida, he can concentrate and he's got the intellectual capacity to do two things at once.
Yeah, and the more things you ask him to do, obviously, any of us, just the harder it is. One of the considerations in the snow is, honestly, offensively, whether you want to be under center in the gun.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of times that in those kind of weather conditions where you want the quarterback under center just to secure the quarterback-center exchange so he has the ball in his hands. He doesn't have to catch it and grip it and all that. But if the snow's dry and it's just kind of, coming down but not really, that slick, wet snow, then being in the gun's okay, and it just slows down the pass rush, and the quarterback can grip the ball and throw it accurately. So Brady was really good in the snow because he had big hands and he was super accurate. and it slowed down the pass rush. He loved it.
Yeah.
We would really also talk about what type of runs are we going to get. You know, we don't want to see pullers if it's slick. Those guys are going to go down. So defensively, you know, we're expecting that downhill run. We're going to plug those gaps a little bit differently. We might not stunt as much. Blitz patterns become a little bit more difficult versus that slick snow because you wind up being out of a gap or you slide and all of a sudden those downhill runs are coming at you and that thing's going all the way down to the end zone. So certainly, you know, it affects the play call from that aspect, both on offense and defense. You know, what type of play calls you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want to be running sideways on a snowy field. You want to be getting the ball with double team blocks or that tight zone blocking and get down into the defense so you can, you know, make that, you know, quick one cut back and run through those arm tackles on the line of scrimmage.
And you got to have a team that can handle it. I mean, that's the amazing thing about Buffalo. Buffalo's a small team, and they're going to have to play in cold weather. Can they hold up in that cold weather? Cincinnati went in there with backup offensive linemen and ran the ball. Joe Burrow beat them in that game. And then last year, unfortunately, they missed the kick to send the game into overtime. But they've got to prove that smaller nickel defense that they have can play in Western New York.
Yeah, and even though they beat the 49ers, they had a hard time tackling and stopping the running game. So one guy who can handle it, though, is Josh Allen. That kid's big, strong, hard to tackle, and he can grip the ball and throw it.
Yeah, and the notion that these guys, where they grow up, determines how they play in weather. I think Mahomes, you know, he knows how to play in weather no matter where he grew up.
Yeah. Well, we try to learn something every year that, you know, we're coaching and we're trying to improve ourselves. And 2008 was one of those years, the last 4 games of that season. We learned a lot about the weather. We had some of the craziest weather games that I can remember. The snow, as we're talking. We had Arizona, second to last game of the year, in a blizzard, and, you know, they just weren't ready to handle it. But we played Buffalo in a wind game. We had a rain game. The snow, the cold, a little bit of heat, certainly great, you know, topics of conversation. But there's a whole nother set of weather. Welcome back to Weather Week here on Coach. Not only have we talked about the heat, we got to deal with the cold and certainly the snow, but we're going to talk about wind, rain, and fog. 3 things that we've got to talk about with the team.
Wind's a big one, especially in the north, but I mean, it could come up anywhere. There's so many different aspects to the wind. It affects the kicking game the most, then the passing game, certainly a big factor in field position. But the crosswind can be tricky. The down the field wind can, you know, certainly affect the field position. But, you know, it's interesting how much that can affect the game and different aspects of the game, you know, as we go through it.
Yeah, we saw Tyler Bass miss a field goal to send the game in overtime in the championship game last year, kicking in the direction where early in the game he kicked an extra point and it barely made it. But you could see the wind was going to be a problem all throughout that game. And the longer the game goes, and these games have been playing later and later, that wind becomes different than when we start to when we finish.
Yeah, and the higher the ball gets, the more the wind affects it. And, you know, those guys that can throw a good tight spiral, like Brady. Brady had a really good tight spiral on his throw. Wasn't affected too much by the wind. The guys that the ball fluttered a little bit, you know, it took a little off the ball, and it just changed the accuracy of the passer.
If we knew we were going to have a wind game Saturday night, we'd be in our staff meeting and everyone would be talking about which flagpole are we looking at to get the accurate direction of the wind so that we could, you know, figure out kickoffs and the passing game and all the rest of it. But we were involved with probably 2 of the bigger wind games that I can remember. Both happened to be in Buffalo, 2008, 2021. That was the most amazing wind I've seen.
Yeah, but just to follow up on your conversation, though, in a lot of stadiums, Gillette being one of them, the direction of the flags at the top of the stadium will blow one way. The direction of the flags at the top of the goalpost on the uprights will blow the other way, and the wind kind of has a swirling effect. So if you look at the wrong flag, you get the wrong direction on the wind. And in Buffalo, you don't have to worry about that. It was a low stadium, and the wind just blew. All the flags blew the same direction. That was probably 2 of the windiest games we ever played in, certainly the one in 2008, where honestly the quarterback center snap on the shotgun was affected by the wind. It would blow it around. It's like a knuckleball back there. But, you know, that was the point where the goalpost blew over sideways, and they were on their side. And then when you were kicking a field goal, the grounds crew would come over and use ropes to pull them and straighten them back up for the kick. And then once the kick was over, then they'd fall back down again. It was crazy, but there was some strong wind. And then we threw the ball 3 times in 21 when we went up there.
Yeah.
It was just too hard to throw. Well, it wasn't too hard for them to throw, but we couldn't throw it.
They just didn't figure it out till too late in the game.
What was your strategy? Did you want the opponent to have the win in their face in the fourth quarter? Was that your strategy?
Yes, generally speaking. So if we won the toss, a lot of times I would take the wind or take the ball, and then they would generally take the win. So at the second half, you had the option to, they would take the ball, then you would decide what goal you wanted to defend, kick off into the win in the third quarter, so you get it in the fourth quarter. So if you took the ball, you had the win in both the second and the fourth quarter.
Yeah, and throwing the ball with the quarterback, it's a little bit like you need a caddy. Like instead of hitting a 6-iron, you probably should hit a 7 because the wind's behind you. But then when the wind's in your face, you better go down to a 4. I mean, that's a hard thing for the quarterback to judge, isn't it? On deep throws.
It really is. And a lot of those balls with the wind just get overthrown.
Right.
The wind just carries it, and then the ball ends up 5 or 6 yards over the receiver's head. But, when we had the crosswinds, the defensive backs would always play the leverage of the wind. So if the wind was coming from the right side, they would play more inside technique, so the quarterback would be less likely to throw the ball outside into the wind, especially into the boundary. And for the deep field safety, the same thing. He could cheat a little bit more towards the wind side if it was a crosswind. So knowing where the wind was blowing. But that was a conversation that Brady and I always had walking off the field in the wind, was like, Tom, how much is this affecting your passing game? Because what I think it is and what the quarterback thinks it is, that's really all that matters. He'd be, I'm already throwing all these routes. It's just this one that's a little bit of a problem that I just can't, it's affecting the ball. Okay, I mean, that's good to know. So it does affect the passing game when it gets severe, but up until that point, most of the NFL quarterbacks can get the ball through, it's called relatively light winds up to like 15, 18 miles an hour.
Yeah, 2008, that wind gust was like 50 miles an hour. And I remember we talked about their sideline. Really, we played the top of the numbers as the sideline. Just physically couldn't get the ball all the way out there. So we just adjusted, shoved everybody inside and played top of the numbers to our sideline. That was the field. We shortened it all up. And, we had a pretty good day that day. It was.
But when the wind blows down the field, that's really where it really affects the game. And Castle had a quick kick in that 2008 game, went 70-some yards, but the ball wouldn't stop rolling. It stopped rolling about the 30, but the wind just blew it down to the 1-yard line. One of the best punts I've ever seen was when Dave Jennings, in the last regular season game in 1981, to get us into the playoffs, we were backed up inside the 10-yard line, and he hit a 55-yarder into the wind in Giants Stadium out of the end zone. And Dallas wasn't able to get in a field goal range. We ended up winning the game and going to the playoffs. But I tell you that it had to be a perfect punt, and it was. It was that really tight spiral that cut through the wind and didn't wobble at all, and was a huge play. But that came from practicing it a lot.
Well, the wind is certainly a problem, but the rain. Wet ball here, talking about practicing, getting ready for the rain. Sometimes, the game doesn't start out with rain, but it finishes with rain. We had a big one against Cincinnati one year out in Cincinnati. It was like they turned the faucets on in the fourth quarter. Rain can certainly affect the game.
Oh, absolutely. And you're right. It's the kind of sometimes unexpected rain, or it might be coming, it might not. And then if you have it at a certain point in the game, it can really affect you, and then it can die out and not affect your opponent, or vice versa. But those forecasts are tough. I remember probably one of my worst preparation moments as a coach was in Miami, and we always talk about the weather, what it's going to be. We talked about the heat and that, and I said, there is 0 chance of rain tomorrow. There's not a chance that it's going to rain. And we get out there in the third quarter, and here come the clouds, and here come some drops, and then all of a sudden it kind of opens up. Yeah. Only for a few minutes, but it opens up. And Brandon Bolden walks over to me and looks at me. Like, 0 chance, huh, Coach? Great job.
Yeah, that's still a message that is texted around to this day. 0 chance of rain in Miami.
And that's when I said, that's it. That's it with the meteorologist. I am covering myself on everything else just like they do.
Yeah.
Never again.
Yeah. How
Never
about,
again.
We talk rain, right? In Miami, it's just rain. But if you're in Kansas City and it's raining and then the temperature drops and all of a sudden now you got slosh, or what's that term they used in Cleveland, the winter mix, where it's rain and snow, but it really snow. I mean, that becomes another issue because now it's freezing and it's wet, and now the balls are getting wet with frozen rain, and it's hard to keep them dry.
That's the worst. Those are the toughest conditions, 100%. The toughest conditions. When you mix all those together, rain, little tiny bit of snow, wind, it's really hard to throw the ball. It's really hard to tackle. There's a little bit of an advantage in the running game if you can get started.
Right.
But the tackling is hard. Passing the ball is very difficult. Kicking the ball and catching it most of the time on the punt returns when it was bad conditions, you always tell the returner, if you can't get it cleanly, just let it go. The only one you're really worried about is the one where they're punting with the wind. If you get back there too deep and they hit it short, it rolls for 25 yards. If you get too short and they kick it over your head, it could be an 80-yard punt. So that's a little tricky. You really need a good returner in that situation. But punting into the wind, if you don't get it, it's not rolling anywhere. Side winds, same thing. If it hits, it's basically going out of bounds. So those are fairly easy. You just don't want to make a mistake and mishandle the ball.
In the rain, we certainly talk about, the footing and, making sure you keep your feet under you. But the other thing you always used to talk about that I thought was great was gloves and the type of gloves, if they were going to wear gloves, that they would wear.
And I learned that from Coach Parcells. Coach Parcells taught me, two really important things on the rain. Number one, make sure you go in the training room and make sure that none of the players had tape wrapped underneath their shoe. When they wrap it around, make sure that, and if they did that, then we would cut it off so that the shoe cleats were on the bottom, not any tape. So that tape's not very good for footing. Number two, all the backs wore long sleeves. There was no skin on the ball. It was skin, cloth, ball. That was a must. If they didn't have it on, he would send them back in to get it, or we're not giving you the ball. So they always wore those long sleeves. And then, like you said, on the gloves, you want to make sure you have gloves that will help grip the ball, not will make it more slick. But you know what? We practiced those wet ball drills a lot. We had the soapy bucket, stick the balls in the soapy water, which made it worse than the game. We could always spray them with silicone just to really get them greased up so nobody could handle them. But it just forces a higher level of concentration.
And it's harder to kick those balls, too.
Oh, sure.
I mean, that's really the other thing is, we see the kicker practicing before he goes out to kick the field goal, but he's not kicking with the ball that's going to be used in the game that becomes a different kick.
One of the best opportunities in that situation was the onside kick.
Right.
If you had one at the end of the game on a wet field with a wet ball, you had a pretty good chance of getting it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's even a surprise onside kick or some type of a mortar squib kick down there that was difficult to handle. Of course, now that's no longer an option in the game, but that was an option, an element there. And, we played in rain. We had LeGarrette Blunt back there returning kickoffs. LeGarrette got the ball. It's wet. It's hard to tackle.
Yeah.
Tackling in the rain is really hard for the defense because you just can't get your hands on anything. The only way to stop them is to get your shoulder in there. But sometimes you can't get close enough to do that like you can out in normal conditions. So rain's very difficult on tacklers.
Tackling would be number one. Hey, wrap them up. Let's not go low. Let's not slide off the pants because they're slick. Let's wrap them up top, really drive our legs. And it created the opportunities for second man in. Again, the ball is a little bit heavier. And if it's a running back carrying the ball, he carries it a lot. But some of those other skill guys that aren't used to those, different type of ball handlings or the ball being a different, just being a little bit heavier, it's a great opportunity for us. So wrap them up high, go in, attack the ball with the second man, and force a turnover.
It certainly took a lot less pressure on the ball to knock the ball out than it did in normal conditions, whether it's the quarterback, knocking it out of his hands or any of the ball carriers or even the receivers just getting your hand in to break it up. It was a lot easier to get it out in rain. But when you practice in it and you get used to it, I think the other thing that comes into play is rain on a grass field.
Yeah.
Now that becomes not only, the slickness of the field, but you also get a mud factor and so forth, and that becomes hard. So 7 stud cleats, best cleats you could wear. Make sure you could really dig in on that. But the wet field, made it really hard again to pass rush, similar to snow.
Yep.
It's really hard to pass rush on a wet, soft field, and especially for the edge guys. So that really helped the passing game. If the other conditions weren't too bad, quarterbacks love that.
And that's where it becomes a problem. We talk about Indianapolis was such a great team at home in their dome with Peyton and all the great players they had. But when they had to go outside, they didn't have home field advantage. That was a different team trying to adapt to all the elements that they had to adapt to, whether it was the cold, whether it was the rain, whether it was the snow, the sleet. It became a little problem, and their size became a problem trying to defend the run outside.
That affected them. I think that affected them a lot. Well, I mean, it would any dome team, but
Right. But if you build your team like a big team in the dome, they were a small team that
Yes.
complemented their offense. And that's what you worry about is if you're in a dome, you should build a size speed team that can play outdoors first, and then you'll have a big advantage indoors.
that's right. I agree with that.
When we'd get those rain games that just kind of popped up in the middle of the game, my favorite guy to watch was always the equipment guy. He's running around trying to get everybody's, shields off as fast as he can because they can't see. They need a windshield wiper there. And you mentioned it with the field. We played Washington on a Sunday. They actually played the Army-Navy game on that field on Saturday, and it poured. That was a mud bowl. We needed the 7-stud cleats just to be able to move around. So it can affect the field.
That was a quagmire, and so was the Baltimore game.
Yeah.
And if you remember, the Baltimore game was so bad that after the game they replaced the field and put turf on, and that was really just a mud bowl.
It was just pushing down in the end zone. I remember, guys have their cleats in the ground, and the whole turf is just pushed into the end zone, so it couldn't stop anybody.
But you got to be like a baseball team. You got to build your team around the stadium you play in. And I think, to me, baseball does a great job with that. The Yankees want left-handed hitters to hit it. The Red Sox want right-handed hitters to hit the porch. But I think you got to have a team that can play. If you're playing on a mud track and you have a really fast team, I think Pittsburgh does a great advantage of this. They're mudders, but then when they go to Baltimore and they play on that turf, they become a faster team and they play the quarterback. I think that's kind of how you have to build your team.
Yes, and if your quarterback isn't very mobile, you're better off on a slow track.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
Well, wind, rain, the last one here to talk about, really one of the most unique ones, is really the fog. We've seen some crazy fog games in the history of this game.
Doesn't come up very often, but when it does, it's crazy. My first year in the league with the Baltimore Colts, we had a big game against the Dolphins, and that game really was going to determine the winner of the East that year. Ended up being a very foggy game to the point where you couldn't see in the end zone. You could only see out to about the middle of the field where the players were, and even that wasn't very clear. The play came down to a final kick by Tony Linhart, and you saw the snap, you saw the ball kick, but you couldn't see the ball. The only thing you could do was look at the referee and see whether he said it was good or not good, and so that was a big win for us that ended up taking us to the AFC East Championship that year. But those fall games are crazy. We had one in New England against the Falcons in 17.
Yep.
That was another fall game where the guys in the press box are useless. Like, what personnel's in the game? What formation? I don't know. I can't see them.
Can't see anything.
You got to figure it out for yourself. So the pictures you get are they're just all smoke and fog. You can't see anything.
It's white,
Philly played Chicago in one of those games. You couldn't see anything, and I think a lot of it because of Lake Michigan. I know when we were in Cleveland, that lake was always a problem when the temperatures got, the coldness of the lake. Not that I'm a weatherman, but the coldness of the lake with the air, kind of made the fog come in. And Cleveland, we had games where we had 4 seasons. It'd start out sunny, and by the end of the game, it was snowing.
Yeah.
And in between, we had fog and we had a little rain. So you could be prepared for everything.
Yeah, in one game, that's exactly right. But those fall games they're very tough to coach, especially.
And hard to predict, I got to imagine. Did you know going into that Miami game down there that it was going to be fog?
No, it rolled in.
So it's hard to predict and say, we're going to practice, or it's impossible, right?
Impossible to practice for fog.
Yeah,
I'm not really sure how you're getting that done. That fog game against Atlanta, that was probably our best defensive call. We had some injuries, and Julio Jones was still, going off.
Jones.
And the only way we could stop him was the fog. We had some help from some pyrotechnics before the game too. They shot off the cannons and the fireworks, and it just sat right on the fog. So thankfully that helped us win that game. But fog, that's unbelievable trying to deal with that.
Yeah, it doesn't come up often, but they've all had a couple of those games, and they really stand out. You never forget those games.
And the TV people at home can't. I remember not being able to watch the Chicago-Philly game, but everybody watched. Like, you had no idea what Randall Cunningham was doing or any of the players on the field, but you watched the game because it was so intriguing to see this, because we never see the fog.
That's right.
Well, it's the middle of December. Weather is going to be a factor. It'll be exciting to see how these teams handle these weather conditions as they come up. It'll be an advantage to the ones that can and a disadvantage to the ones that can, and it can, help teams win and help teams lose.
Yeah, and in the end, as we've talked about, the team has to be mentally tough to handle whatever the conditions are, work through those, and focus on the opponent that they have to defeat.
Well, when we come back to Coach, we're going to move on from weather, and we're going to talk about some of the big games coming up this week.
Welcome back to Coach. We're going to go inside the huddle and preview Week 16 games, which includes Saturday games. Now that college season is over, we get NFL on Saturday, and we have a lot of playoff implications that are still ongoing. Home field advantage, which is still ongoing. Nightcap's going to be good, too, because now we're going to get good, hard weather football. AFC North, we got the rematch between Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh won the first game, kicking 6 field goals with Boswell. We know Baltimore has had field goal troubles with Justin Tucker. But the rematch game is going to be so good to watch because these teams know each other. There's no fooling anyone here. It's going to come down to execution.
Well, you know, Maryland's south of the Mason-Dixon line, so the weather might not be that bad. You never know. But, yeah, great matchup there. The crowd's into it. Those two teams, they can't stand each other. So it's an awesome rivalry. It's very super competitive. And two good coaches, two good offenses, two good defenses. I still like Tucker, especially kicking at home. So this will be a great matchup, and it'll have a lot to do with how this AFC North ends up.
Yeah, great coaching in this game. I think you look at two really strong teams, good personnel, great coaching. You expect to see this is a slug-it-out game. Not a lot of scoring in the first one. You know, I think they're actually going to be scoring in this one. I think, you know, you get those teams the second time around. Maybe there's stuff you left on the call sheet that you didn't get to call that you still feel is good. You got another opportunity to practice it and kind of prepare. I think we could get some points in this game. This is going to be a tough game. It'll be fun.
Points and situation football.
Yeah.
Red area, third down conversions, maybe fourth down conversions, some hidden yardage. Baltimore's got all those penalties. They need to stop giving away that yardage and those extra opportunities with it being the most penalized team in the league. It doesn't really matter what the stats were in the last 3 quarters of the season, like we saw with Kansas City last year in the playoffs. If you can get some things cleaned up at this time of year, fewer turnovers, fewer penalties, better third down, better red area, better 2-minute, that's all that really matters, and this will be a great opportunity for both teams.
And get your kicker hot again. I mean, we know Tucker can get back going at any time.
Sure
We've seen him do it. He's going to go, you know, he's a Hall of Fame type kicker, so we know he can do that. And I think Lamar said it after the first time they played, we got to stop beating ourselves. And I think the biggest opponent for Baltimore is themselves.
Yes, really, Baltimore could have won all their games. Like you said, most of the time they kind of beat themselves, and they've got to stop doing that this time of year.
Yeah, I think, and the physicality of the game, you know, it certainly is going to lend itself to exactly what we want on a Saturday afternoon right before Christmas.
And there'll be young players in this game that have to step up and make plays and not, you know, be a detriment to their team. So those penalties that, you know, come up with some of these guys right now as they're trying to, you know, play good football, they got to eliminate that stuff. I think the young players in the same, they got to step up and really, you know, put their best effort.
What did you always tell the rookies now this time of the year? You're not a rookie anymore,
Not
right?
anymore.
Yeah.
Not in Week 16.
No, you're not a rookie anymore. It's time to grow up. It's time. You're in the second year of your college career. It's time to start playing good. And then we have the other rematch just up the road here in Philadelphia. The Eagles face the Commanders. The Eagles won the game in Philadelphia. Now they've got to go to Washington and see if they can duplicate it. It was a closer game. Obviously, Jaden Daniels was struggling with the rib injury in the first game, didn't throw the ball as well. But we'll see how he reacts the second time playing the Philadelphia defense, Matt.
And I think there's going to be changes to that game plan that we saw, you know, the first time around. They're going to make adjustments. They're going to give him some different looks and really put the pressure on him. I think they're going to go after him early and just try to get in front of it and play from that lead, play from ahead.
Yeah, it almost feels like the Commanders are getting worn down a little bit here over the course of the season. Philly's going to be a tough matchup for them. They're going to need their A game on this one to you know, handle Philly's offense, especially Barkley. And then it's a complicated defense when they match those zones like Vic and the Philly defense is doing a better job of now. That'll be a big challenge for Daniels, and Philly's tough against the run. Washington's going to have to play well. I'm not saying they're not capable of it. They're going to need their best game.
Playing a running back the second time, knowing the runs he have and getting used to the speed of the game, does that help Washington here?
I don't know. I think the biggest problem for Washington is handling the offensive line, defeating blocks, getting off blocks, and then tackling Barkley. The great thing about Barkley is he's had a full head of steam almost every play. He's been able to get through the line of scrimmage with some momentum where he can use his cutting ability and his power to step through those arm tackles. If he can keep getting those, he's a pretty hard guy to tackle. I don't care who it is.
Tackling is the key, because if you miss a tackle, I agree. I think Washington, not really worn down, but just moving a little bit slower than maybe what we saw at the beginning part of the year, where I feel like Philadelphia is moving faster. And if you miss a tackle, I think they just break away, and those become huge plays in the game.
And if Washington tries to get too heavy inside and load it up, then Smith and Brown are going to be a problem outside. They just are.
Philly's remarkable because they lead the league in rushing attempts, and they're last in the league in passing attempts, yet they make so many explosive plays with their passing game. I mean, that becomes the problem. They're very judicious in terms of when they throw the ball. They don't throw it sideways. They throw it up the field to make a big play.
Mm-hmm. And very successfully, too. And then Hurts doesn't have to throw the ball 45 times a game.
Right.
They stay out a lot of third and longs because of that running game. So he can scramble on third down, or they can even hand the ball off. He's got a lot of third down options when it's 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. As always, Washington will be able to stay in the game if they can play good red area defense, and then the game will never get away from them point-wise. But, Philly's tough down there because, again, if you can run it in, then pass defense doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I think they've got to get the ball to McLaurin. Last time they struggled to get the ball struggled to get the ball to their best players at the right time in the game.
And he's one of the most dynamic, most difficult players in the NFL to cover. This guy is so good. And with those match zones, if they get him outside and they can get those one-on-one matchups, even though it may not be man, it's still matched like man. Now it's a big play, and there's another guy that can make people miss and turn small gains or small pass routes into huge plays in the game. He's got great speed. He's a really good player.
This is the best time of the year. We get playoff football without it being playoffs.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Cliff has something up his sleeve.
He has to.
Yeah.
Some kind of a trick play, trick formation, something that the Eagles haven't seen before because, again, when you have a very disciplined defense like the Eagles are trying to put together, sometimes you get something that's a little bit unusual and it just doesn't match up if you can get the ball off.
Right. That's a great point because I think, to me, since they've changed the kickoff rule, you can't steal a possession anymore with a surprise onside kick. So you got to try to find a creative way to steal a possession or make a big play. And I think that's where Washington is in this game. If they want to go toe-to-toe with Philly, it's going to be a hard out for them. It's going to be a tough. They're not there yet. They're a draft away from being there, let's be clear. But to steal a possession or steal a big play is something they have to do.
Yeah, or get a big turnover on defense and swing the game on a defensive or a special team play, a punt return or something like that. But they're going to need a couple of bonus points in here somewhere.
Well, that's a wrap on our Week 16 edition of Coach. Please come back and join the fellow coaches here, Matt Patricia and Bill Belichick, when we review Week 16 and look forward to Week 17. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.